Well, God bless you, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us today on the broadcast. My name is Apostle Lance Bellany, and as always, it is my pleasure to have you here with us and to be a part of the broadcast because the broadcast wouldn't be what it is and what it is to become without you and without your participation, your engagement, and the dialogue that is created between us. So thank you so very much for taking a few minutes out of your walk of faith to be a part of the broadcast here on Kingdom Voice. And today, being no exception, your presence makes a difference. So please feel free to share your thoughts, your comments, your questions, even your disagreements. I mean, this is what this platform is all about. It is about us journeying together into the kingdom of heaven such that we can become all that Elohim has desired and purposed us to be. So thank you so very much. Again, it is my pleasure to have you here with us. And before we get started, allow me to just dispense with a few formalities. For those of you that would like to connect with us, you can see on your screen, Kingdom Voice Broadcast. You can reach us via email at lcbellany@yahoo.com. By the way, that is my personal email. It comes directly to me. I see it, and I will respond to it typically within a couple of hours at the longest, but certainly before the end of the day. So please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach us on our website at rotruth.org. We do have a podcast on the Spotify platform as well under Kingdom Talk. And you can catch replays of our broadcast in audio format for those of you that may have long commutes and spend a lot of time in your vehicles. This is a perfect venue for you to take in some of the things that we've been talking about here on the broadcast of Kingdom Voice. And finally, for those of you that want to reach out to us via snail mail or regular mail, you can do so at our mailing address at 214 Remington Road, Huntsville, Texas, 77340. And again, thank you so very much. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to share with you and to journey with you here as we journey into the kingdom. Today, special day for me in particular. To have a special guest with us on the broadcast today. And I am so excited. I met this young lady 13 plus years ago, maybe not 13 years ago, 9 years ago or so, and was very impressed. And little did I know that sometimes later we would be on a broadcast together as she shared her story. So I'm really excited about her being on the broadcast with us today. So let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Her name is Taylor Silva. She grew up in a small town in deep East Texas in Shelby County. She attended Texas A&M University for both graduate and undergraduate studies in engineering. So she and I have a lot in common as both of us are engineers. Taylor has worked for over a decade in the energy and water nexus. Her pride and joy is her family. Her interests are the natural world, relationships, systems thinking, and making the most of her time on earth. Like many of us that are impacted by life, so is Taylor. And her life was forever changed by her own cancer journey. Beginning in the late fall of 2022, and the rich learnings of mind, body, spirit healing that resulted in her harnessing of a miracle. And we're going to talk about that today. She is now evolving her work to integrate learnings from her healing journey as a collaborator and facilitator, finding herself supported by a growing community of evolved people from all concerns of the world. And that's something that really struck my attention, and really I'm looking forward to talking about as a part of our interview today, the learnings from all around the world that she's gaining. Because if you've been a part of this broadcast, you know that I've been championing the idea and the understanding that the path to the kingdom is broader than just through Christianity. And people from all walks of life are going to enter into that intimate engagement with Elohim. And we're going to talk about that today from all corners of the world, that each in their own ways are stewarding shifts in consciousness. So with that being said, I want to welcome to the broadcast today, Miss Taylor Silva. And Taylor, thank you so very much for taking a few minutes out of your schedule to be with me and to be with us here on the broadcast. And so with that being said, welcome. Why don't you kind of take it from there and open up a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the discussion on this morning.
Sure. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I too would have never forecasted we would be in this particular dialogue, but I'm deeply grateful for your curiosity. There aren't many folks I've found that are willing to explore, these spiritual conversations. So I'm deeply grateful for the opportunity to share. This is one of the first times I really have shared a lot, definitely in this format, and all that stems from your commitment to the curiosity. So it's been very and a very important part of almost the integration piece from all that's happened since 22, for you to even invite me here today. So that being said, thanks.
Yeah. So, Taylor, let's kind of kick off the discussion. You're a mom. Well, when I met you, you were a single young lady. When I met you, now you're a mom, a mother, a wife. Talk about, let's kind of start right there before we move forward. That transition going from a young lady graduating from Texas A&M now into the role of a wife, and then now the role of a mother. And we'll start there. Kind of help us. How did you make that transition?
Oh, I wish I could use the word gracefully. That's not coming up right now. It was a little bumpy. I think so. Everything has been surrounded in love, right? My husband was the only man I'd ever met, and the reason I knew I loved him is because I knew he's the man that I wanted to have children with, and it was very, very clear to me. So I will say that was very clear. The desire for these children it was very clear. And becoming a mother, it was my first opportunity to really know how the lengths I would go for someone else, right? And I think that's been one of the biggest gifts, is learning to shift that attention off of myself. And even like the pregnancy, for example, you do things during pregnancy you don't normally do. You work out and eat well and do all those things for the baby, right? We know we're supposed to do them for ourselves. So that, and even the clarity I had about bringing them into the world, it's funny because looking in the rearview mirror, that supported my healing journey. The knowing of my body is capable of doing this naturally. I changed OBs like a couple weeks before the first one was born, and it was sort of stressful because it came from a place of, that's not the right path. I've got to do it. I don't feel supported with what my vision is, right? And so, as I would say specifically mothers really know, once you complete that arc and you have this child now outside of your body, like, you can move a mountain, right? It's just your whole reality is reprogrammed, and it's the most empowering thing. So very important part to my mind-body connection.
So you mentioned the part about knowing that this man, and I do happen to know your husband, Carlos. This man, you knew that this man was the man you wanted to have children with, and thus you wanted to be married and gracefully engage in that life regenerating, procreating process. You made the decision to marry Carlos which is a little bit different. And I'm going to draw a really stark contrast between who you are or who you were and who Carlos is, right? So you're from East Texas. Let's put some context on this. You're from East Texas, right? Very rural. And yeah, I would venture to say probably, and you can correct me, feel free to do so, not very well refined coming from East Texas, right? And here's Carlos, this South American man, not even from America. How did you reconcile and how did that arrive to be the man that you wanted to marry?
You know, I think our subconsciouses do really funny things. And we actually tease each other, you know, those first few years of marriage as you're figuring out your cadence or whatnot. We really realized that we chose the more challenging path, right? Because, you know, in most villages you match and say marriage is hard, so we're going to try and find some similarities so y'all at least don't have to discuss everything. And so Carlos and I, that's ended up being our strength, is we have this healthy, we'll call it a tension, right? We know there's love in between, but you're right. There's it would definitely the polarities, personality, culturally, just all of the polarities. And so our marriage has been it's been full of intention, right? We've wanted it to work and we've wanted to navigate the differences. So no, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I answered your question. And maybe there was a part of me that knew I needed something like a balancing agent, I think, or desired a balancing agent. I'm not sure. That it was a tug somewhere, right?
So Carlos, and just allow me to ask this question. So Carlos is Venezuelan, and how did you and how have you found just the acclimation to his upbringing and where he came from and the cultural norms that he brought to the marriage, as contrasted with the way you grew up, your cultural norms? How did you guys reconcile those differences, if there were any differences?
I think we're still reconciling them. I think it's a process of reconciliation, right? I claim he was born in the wrong country, just to be honest. He, you know, from a very young age, I would say he's not like a typical Venezuelan. And I think Venezuelans would say that about him as well, right? He is, anyway, so his path even to come to America was based circumstantially very different than most that I've heard. It was, he wanted a place where laws and rules were honored and respected, right? He's very analytical and wanted to participate in like a functioning thing, and he's very self-aware, and yeah, you know, the cultural pieces, they and this is why I say that it's an ongoing, is because we don't always know what our stealthy expectations, that's the phrase we use in our marriage a lot, what our stealthy expectations are until sort of a moment or a situation arises. So we just sort of have a practice of naming like, hey, I've had this stealthy expectation, and you know, here's maybe why I'm a little grumpy, and then we talk about it. And so it's a continuous practice that we have, because I don't know that we could or have gotten it all out in the first, you know, decade of our marriage. We haven't covered all those corners.
Well, good. So let's shift the conversation a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about your religious upbringing and some of the challenges that you and I have talked about leading up to this conversation. You had some apprehensions. You had some real reservations about your religious upbringing. Let's kind of start there. So you were raised in East Texas, very Baptist oriented, I would guess.
Well, yes, the county was sure. You know, there's sort of like two main churches, and it was the Baptist church and the Methodist church. There's also a strong Pentecostal
Okay.
population as well. But I personally grew up in the Methodist church,
Okay.
had grandparents that were Baptist, but in the Methodist church, and there was not a strong youth program. I think my mom sort of helped wrangle a few other kids, but it was a very charmed, lovely experience because we had all this love and attention and community from that setting and from these elders, that even when I go home now, it's quite different because most everyone is gone. So the generational difference was pretty stark there.
So as you were growing up in that, was there this tremendous, overwhelming, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, affinity and for God to be a part of your life and the like, or was there more of a question mark around who is this, what is this, what does this really mean to me? Kind of bring us into that part of your experience.
Sure. So I would say that my mother really influenced my religious experiences, and she grew up in Tennessee, and their family's philosophy was all about love, and they had experienced high times and low times, and so really culturally the family brought love, and so coming into, as far as like being a Methodist, that was my main lens and practice was, even as a baby, she would tell stories of, hey, I gave you back to God as soon as I got you, you were his, I'm just getting to be your parent. And then my dad is he's an outdoorsman. And so I spent a lot of time outside in the natural world, walking quietly so you don't spook the deer. And so those were sort of my lenses, was love and nature. And then about the time I was 10 years old, we volunteered, and this was through my father. We would go on Saturdays and volunteer with the East Texas Archaeological Society with a local grave site it was a discovery of a Caddo Indian burial site. So we'd work with the state archaeologist. A lot of volunteers would come and start learning the stories of these Indians and it's on this beautiful hill. There's a little creek running by, and my imagination loved it. I loved imagining the peaceful nature of these Indians and how they lived in harmony with the land. And then I would go to church on Sunday, and I would, it wasn't quite the hellfire brimstone, but I basically heard they weren't in the club,
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think that's the root of the tension. Was I adored this harmony of, and my imagination loved hearing about Native people living in harmony with the natural world. And then I didn't understand why, because we sort of got here with our shirts tucked in and our hair brushed on time to this spot on Sunday morning, we got in the club. It didn't make sense to me. And so I would go and talk to the preacher and just say, but these people really were, they did great. They used the whole deer. They didn't waste, and so that's been the part of my question mark, I think, that has just like hung around with me.
So and that's a great segue. So now you're starting to, as you put it, feel a tension between what you're looking at, what you're experiencing, what you're seeing with your emotions, your eyes, your psyche. You're looking at this and coming to an understanding of the creative thing that is around you. And then you go to this, as you said, this pristine setting on Sunday morning and being told that what you're looking at doesn't really fit into what we're talking about over here. That's my words. What we're talking about over here. So now there's a tension going there. As I know, and just to move our conversation along, as I know, that tension really began to grow and build to an untenable place. Kind of talk about how it got to where you made the decision that Sunday morning wasn't really what you were after.
Sure, sure. So I think there was sort of a natural break in college. You're in charge of your own schedule and you don't always, repeat what you did in youth. And
Absolutely.
so there was probably that natural sort of exploration and deviation. Um, as a wife and Carlos and I navigating, I joke Catholicism. I think it didn't stick to, not only did it not stick to him, I think it bounced off of him and went the other way. So he did not, just his personality does not like being told what to do. So we both, and having a more prescriptive religion, I think that he brings a different perspective as well. So as we navigated, what did we both agree on as a couple and for our family? We're very slow to do things just because that's the way we did them before. So, even if we think about Christmas, we sort of think, what is it that we actually want to do and what we believe in and the cadence and whatnot, and try to go from there. It's a practice and it changes. And, yeah, so that, but I'll tell you, having the cancer story, the cancer journey, it almost gave me this permission to explore again as myself, right? And step away from trying to figure it out with my husband as this, agreement that we have. And I'll tell you, even in this reintegration, he and I are still figuring that piece out. Right. He provided protection for me during this time and wanted nothing more than for me to be healed and whole.
Right.
And
Right.
so he sort of surrounded me and said, you go figure out what you need to heal and I'm gonna cover you. Right. And now that I've done that in this my own little, way that I'm still finding language for. And I don't know, and I know that I did not have great language along the way either to share with him. Here's what I'm experiencing, right? It was more of there's evidence of healing, and he's okay, great, keep going, right? I don't need to know about it, just keep going. And so even now, this is sort of the next phase of our marriage is me being able to share and explore. And he's not as it doesn't have the spiritual curiosity that even you have. So you've asked questions that he hasn't, right? And so that's the kind of the next chapter for us to learn.
So let's talk about that since you brought it up, and let me start the conversation around you journeying and navigating your cancer survivor experience, and I'd like to put it that way. When you first found out that you had cancer, was your first reaction to draw upon the faith from your upbringing, or did you find yourself in this no man's or no woman's land of where do I draw this strength from? How do I empower myself, or what do I do to it? Kind of take us from through those first emotional experiences that you began to go through when you found out you had cancer, both psychologically and also spiritually, if you don't mind.
Sure, sure. So, great questions. And I will preface that before I learned about cancer, I had stepped away from industry on my own sense making journey. I felt really not coherent with the way I was showing up every day and what I saw the results of my work. And so almost to this point where I stepped away and, you and I met in the water technology space. And so I
Yes.
relied heavily on the analytical, the engineering, let's find a solution, let's go build, build, build. And I reached this point where I kind of looked at the water side of the energy industry and felt like it looked like a Frankenstein. I'm like, all the parts are there and none of them are playing well together. Maybe I need to understand about finance. So I said, but I don't want to do the traditional finance stuff. I actually started in the business school and really was driven away. I just didn't enjoy the capitalistic approach to solutions. And so I found this course, or this course found me, and it was the first course in regenerative economics by a group called Capital Institute. And I was in there with, and this was the beginning of the global community. And there are all these thought leaders from all over the world. Think of companies like Patagonia and Danone, and these companies that are really trying to redefine how businesses do business. And the language and the concepts I was introduced to, it made it, all of a sudden I said, yes, this is why I have felt the feelings they had, the context of industrialization, for example, and extraction, right? And that these models are only a few hundred years old, and here's how they deviated from natural systems models, and here's why we feel disconnected. Here's why they're with the external and material world, not the intrinsic, right? So from that course, and with that course, I actually learned part of it was breath work, holotropic breath work. And the concept is for big change, consciousness has to change, consciousness has to shift. So I learned about not focusing on the thing, you focus on the relationship with the thing, whether that be how a company behaves in the world, or how you behave with your cup of coffee, right? There's a relationship, and the relationship, and that's from complexity science, right? So learning and understanding your relationship with things and in the world, and it sort of ripples out in big ways. So from that sense making journey, I really focused on relationship, learned about breath work, which brought about this connectedness. In those holotropic breathwork sessions, I was able to access this complete somatic experience of knowing love and knowing connection. And so to answer your question about where did I, what spiritual practice did I sort of grab on? It was my childhood. If I were to have a sound bite of my childhood faith, I remember always just wanting faith like a child. So I would say my religious upbringing was hold on to faith like a child. That's really important. Mm-hmm. And then the sense-making journey is relationship, right? Relationship, and hold on to your compass, release the map. Because however it is that you're wanting to move in the world with coherence, where your heart feels really good about whatever your mind's doing, and vice versa, that's releasing. There's not a roadmap anymore. And I, go as far as to say anyone who does say they have a roadmap, I now decrease my level of trust in that person, because I just I don't believe it.
And I know I didn't see a roadmap while I was there.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So, you drew on that part of it, maintain that faith like a child. But now you were dealing with the potential of not being here. I mean, you were facing and staring the departure of this life, as they say, right in the eyes. Mm-hmm. And you had to make some choices. You had to enter into some unfamiliar territory, and you had to be at least courageous enough to go there to seek reprieve from this attack that you were receiving. Mm-hmm. Talk about the courage, to be able to make that step, and what were some of the most harrowing choices that you had to make in this process?
Whew, that's a big one to unpack. It didn't start off as courage. There was a lot of shame. There was a lot of shame around being sick at the beginning.
Talk
I felt
about
like
that,
I
Taylor. You said that to
sure,
me. I'd like to
sure.
the listening audience to hear that part of it and why you felt that this sense of shame for being sick.
Well, I found it interesting because my husband had fear. He had fear of loss. I never
Hmm.
had the fear of loss. In fact, whenever, I woke up from a surgery and they had said it was cancerous, it was very clear to me. The first question I said is, why is this happening for me? Right? I never even thought, like, I'm
To
going
me.
down with this ship. Yeah. And then I realized I wasn't telling people I was sick. And I realized I was sort of future me imagining my children without a mother. I had all this shame for letting them down because I had not done something or I had overlooked something that ultimately let them down because I wasn't going to be able to be there for them. So I had all this shame and I call it health vanity. I sort of had this health vanity. And was able to find a way to, but that was kind of that first wave, that first thing to look in the eye was, and that ultimately was is the work. It was the work. It is the work. It is the practice. Whatever the scary monster is, as long as you turn your back to it, it's going to be there. And so the practice is learning whatever you resist is going to persist. So you turn and you look at it in the eye and you say, hello, hello, Shane. How are you? I need to get to know you for a minute. Right. And then it's the next one. Okay. Then maybe I felt a little fear. And so that's ultimately I guess the courage piece is the turning and looking in the eye. And I'll tell you the sound bites, I have little sound bites that help me. It's the story of the buffalo versus the cow. And I have no idea how true this is. I haven't completely fact checked it, but I needed it. So I'm using it. And this is what it
It's
is.
mine. I'm taking it and I'm
It's mine. It's my, yeah. The story I heard was that a cow, they see a storm and they turn and they run from the storm. And that the buffalo somewhere learned to turn into the storm and that it would be in the storm a shorter amount of time if you run
yes.
into the storm. So I got a
Yes.
little buffalo keychain and I said, this is what I get to do now. Turn and face this and run into the storm. Right. So that, I guess that would be the courage would be my buffalo persona.
That's interesting because I absolutely identify with that understanding. You face the storm and you travel into the storm, and as the storm is crossing over you, going wherever it's going to find its next victim, you're in and out of the storm as opposed to running with the storm and you stay in it because
And
you're
it's
traveling in
yes.
the same direction as the storm. That's
Mm-hmm.
the engineering analytical coming out both of
Yeah.
us, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So so it's interesting, and I want to go back and talk a little bit here. So now all of a sudden, Taylor, you're faced with this life-changing experience that's coming upon you, and you're starting to see life differently. That's just, I mean, I would believe that there's just no other way to navigate that without changing your perspective and your paradigms and your expectations and things of that nature. So you're starting to see life a little bit different than what you were prior to this experience. And in this process, a heightened awareness of a heightened spiritual awareness is starting to set in. It's starting to engage with Taylor. Now mind you, now I want to remind the audience where you came from. You came from this Methodist upbringing in rural East Texas, and now you're starting to engage kind of back to that place where you were with the Indians on the hillside, this natural, holistic approach to spirituality. Kind of take us down that path, if you don't mind.
Sure, sure. So let's think. I I realized I had this certain vision of wholeness. And all of my efforts were in service of how do I maintain that vision of wholeness? How do I achieve it? How do I harness a miracle? And it's fascinating because as soon as and it took several of these for me to go back and go, hold on, I just had curiosity about harnessing a miracle. And then things like there's a documentary that came up within, a couple days of me going, how do I get my miracle? And it's called Heal. It's a documentary, I think it's on Amazon Prime. And this lady has gone all around the world to see how miracles happen. So she has these 9 tenets. And I said, well, fantastic. I can kind of carve out my own protocol based on this stuff, right? So that was sort of the response to my question. And I started realizing every time I would effort and go, I need to figure out what is the chemo and what is this and why, and I'd kind of contract, I would lose my flow and answers would not come to me. And then I realized I had the same experience of childbirth. Anytime I would effort on trying to help, the baby come through my body, it would actually tense up. I needed to go back into my breathing and allow the body to do its thing. Or with nursing the child, the more stressed I was about was the baby eating, the milk wouldn't flow. If I was relaxed, the milk would flow. So that was that contraction expansion that I began to settle into. And I eventually call that my call and response. So I then learned practices of how do I prioritize my need for this week or this day, really is this day, just to get through the day, my daily bread, right? What is my daily bread today? And become very clear about what I need that day, be able to pray for it, be able to tune my body to receive the answers. So my main prayer is, Lord, please give me the eyes to see and the ears to hear any of the gems you have before me, right? How do I tune in? Because I know it's all around me, but I'm blocking my own ability to see it. So it began a practice of tuning in to these infinite possibility and playing with imagination and allowing my imagination to not limit possibility, right?
So you if I'm hearing you correctly, you weren't trying to steer God into or steer your healing into a particular direction. You were positioning yourself to receive your healing or receive your miracle from wherever it came from. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. Well, my ask was, let me be a miracle, right?
Yes.
I was very clear that I wanted a clean temple. Like, please heal me, right? This is what I want. I want it to be a story of love. I want the love to flow through me, in me, and all around me. Like, what is that? How do you want it to unfold? And then it was a practice of allowing, right? Whether it be allowing those subtleties and the spiritual things to take place, and sort of have a sense of humor, which came from curiosity of like, okay, I guess this is what I'm supposed to explore this week because the book just came to my doorstep and I didn't order it. The person just sat next to me and said these things after I had that prayer and it matched up. Like, here we go. I'm going to hold on to that affirmation and see what happens. And then there would be this amazing flow, exactly what I needed. And I would sort of have this chuckle of, okay, thanks, I got it, and then I'd get to the next practice. But it began to be fun, if that makes any sense.
It does. And the interesting thing about that, and I'd like to just explore this a little bit more, one of the areas that I find that I draw on as a part of my own growth and maturity is looking at nature to see the true pureness of how God created us. He gave us an extra, and I use the term God, Elohim. I know you use the term divine presence, awareness, how we were created, but we were given this added element of consciousness and awareness and decision, right? Other elements of creation were simply given the aspect of life, living, and being. And so I look at a tree, I look at animals, I look at other creations of nature, and they don't spend time trying to prove themselves or prove their existence or prove who they are to anything. They just be who they were created to be. And I hear a lot of that in what you're saying. And please, again, correct me if I'm wrong. This is me internalizing your story. I hear a lot of that in the fact that you were getting back to that place of just being and letting things occur as you have asked them to occur. And I find that extremely interesting because I see that as a big part of my journey and my re-education and my reawakening, if you will, to be able to just receive and be who Elohim has created me to be. And so I know I kind of interrupted your story with my little deal here, but that's what I hear coming out of your story. Where am I missing it?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And this is where I think it's very fun to draw on wisdoms from, well, and I should say that, Carlos is also a PhD in mechanical engineering. So he's got this thermodynamic background, and we talk about energy and systems a lot, which then goes into the natural world. And you think just thermodynamically, right? Energy flows. You can start tugging at quantum stuff like really quickly.
Absolutely.
And but the being, whenever you're, reflecting back to me what you hear, I call that my rebalance. I learned about more of this yin yang, right? Feminine, masculine energy concept. I had no understanding of that. That came during that course as well. But the principles that we know of, polarities, right? And so I really enjoyed learning how this feminine masculine energy has been articulated in other cultures. And then
Let me interrupt you
understanding.
there. Let me
Sure.
interrupt you for just a second.
Sure.
So
Sure.
the audience you're listening that's listening to your story
Yeah.
has a strong affinity toward the feminine and masculine. We've talked ad nauseum
Okay.
about the
Okay.
feminine and the masculine aspect of the creator. Okay. Okay. So that's a huge component of this audience's participation with me. The
Okay.
feminine and the masculine. And so I'd like for you to kind of spend a little time talking about this feminine masculine engagement and relationship, even within the energy, and how you have experienced the difference and within the dynamics of the feminine and masculine in what you went through. Go ahead.
Sure. No, that's helpful. Thank you. To distill it and compress it into something short, I would call it oscillations, right?
Okay.
So if there's something, and then that can be with anything, whether that's sun and moon, happy, sad, like, you find that oscillation or the binaries, and then life is, whether it be something, everything can be, I think, run through that lens of where on the oscillation is it. And so for me personally, of what you're saying, this, as we show up in nature, and then the allowing the being, my understanding of myself is that I had really valued the masculine, the external, the physical, the mental, the scientific, the logical. These things are all what our society, especially in capitalism, right? Our society says these are value. So my effort of rebalance, and keep in mind, I can be analytical. My natural tendency is a heart space, is an emotional, and I did not have language or really ways to value that, right? And so my personal rebalance in being was simply creating a practice to allow emotion and spiritual to be as much of my daily world as the physical and mental side of things, right? And that is the practice. Like, that is the being. I don't know
So-
that it, yeah.
No, I was just going to ask. So when you look at, you use the term masculine and feminine. Okay, you talked about the yin and the yang, the oscillation. How does the feminine relate to the oscillation? And how does the masculine? What's the relationship of the masculine and feminine
Ah,
in the oscillation? And how did you
sure.
draw on one versus the other, or both at the same time? Talk about that for just
Sure,
a minute.
sure. So my sense making journeys, I've called them hibernations. I've called them wintering, right? It was not pretty. It was stark and cold. I didn't know what was going to bloom, right? So literally, I felt like I would hold these images of almost being a seed underground, and I knew I was going to sprout, but it wasn't like before this. So this whole arc that you described of becoming a mother and a wife and working, those are all outward expressions, right? That's very masculine, the outward, the sun, the bright, the extrovert. And so I had resisted those hibernations and that wintering. Whereas once I realized nature has winter for a reason. It's a very, very, very important cycle, right? You can't
Mhm.
have the spring without the winter. It's so necessary for things to grow and bloom. Then I began to embrace that being the feminine. The feminine is that dark, quiet, still wintering,
Mhm.
right? The masculine is the summer, bright, whatnot. So ultimately, I learned to give equal value to that wintering time, and going forward, I hope to naturally let myself winter before I get sick again,
Mhm.
right? So that's how it really showed up.
Okay, it's interesting. Many times, people project what they see on their perception of God. They
Mm,
project their experiences onto the God that they perceive. I've arrived at a place in my journey, in my walk, to where I am trying to reverse that process and look at it from this paradigm. The reason I see it the way I do, okay, is because it originated in the creator
mm,
first, and the creator projected that on what I see. And I say that, and I'll give you an anecdotal example. I looked at my family and I saw a mother and a father, okay? And eventually I began to understand later in life, much, much, much later in life, recently later in life, that the reason I saw a mother and a father was because the creator projected that onto the earthly family.
mm,
I'm seeing that to be more and more, and it is allowing me to reconcile some things that have long escaped me, my understanding
mm,
of the creator. Okay, because I couldn't understand why I saw it but didn't hear about it as a part of the creator that I knew, a part of God that I knew. And so I'm learning to reverse that process, if you will, and understand that the things we see, the things we do are a product of what was created. And now how do I tap into the pureness of the creation to gain the life, the intimacy that I desire? A long explanation, but that's part of the process that I've gone through as well, to be, to get a greater understanding of the creator. We're getting close toward an hour here, Taylor. A couple of things. One, would you mind joining me again next week, perhaps?
that'd be wonderful. I'd be honored.
Okay. Because there's some more that I would like to explore as a part of your journey, and this hour just hadn't allowed us to do it. But let me ask one more question before we move on. When you look at all that you journeyed through, so the cancer, the life-changing, as I like to call it, significant emotional event in your life,
Mhm.
okay? Um, did that draw you closer to the God that you grew up with? Or did that
Mm.
challenge you to go seek a God that you didn't yet know?
I would say it reminded me of the knowing I had as a child of
Okay.
that pure,
Okay.
you're playing in the field out in the tree and you know the universe is unfolding for good and love and light, right?
Okay.
That faith like a child, that knowingness. um a friend of mine used the word of it's more about subtraction than addition. And so I really was comfortable releasing all these other narratives to that simplicity of what you're describing. I hear as wholeness, right?
Okay.
That wholeness of love. And so ultimately it every one of these threads, it traced back to love. And I think love is too small of a word, but it's the one
Yes.
that I know how to use right now, right?
Yeah, it's
And
interesting.
so,
It's interesting you say
yeah.
that. Love, we have one word for it, right? And in the Hebrew language, which is where we get a lot of our Eastern religious understanding from, there's
Mhm.
phileo, there is agape, there are a number
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
words
Mhm.
to express love, and we distill it down to one and paint everything with that one
Yeah.
word, and
Yeah.
it often
Yeah.
doesn't work.
So maybe to answer your question more fully, it was completely settling in and exploring love. Yeah.
Okay.
And
Okay.
what that meant for me. Yeah.
And so as um and by the way, if there are any questions or comments from the audience that would like to you'd like to ask, please feel free to do so as well. Um, when we look at Taylor, your and you and I've had some very personal conversations offline of this formal conversation we're having right now, and I'd like to just touch on that for the next 2 or 3 minutes. Um, your experience with the divine, with God, with Elohim, and I'm using all of those three terms interchangeably for this conversation, right?
Mhm.
Your experience with the divine, how has that changed for you since
Mm.
this time? How has that changed? And I'll let you define what change means, but how has that changed for you?
Sure. I am now very, very comfortable with not having, I think I always was waiting to understand more and like have an answer before I could commit to say, yes, I am full on this belief and this whatnot. And so being forced with the health journey to, and we didn't say, like, this was a stage 4 grim diagnosis, and now we have a clean bill of health. So it was the whole arc of
It
healing.
was dire.
Yeah, yeah. um to develop the practice, I now what's changed is I'm comfortable with a practice, a daily practice of whatever it looks like for that day. Because
Hmm.
before, I think I sort of held a little bit of, we'll say, perfectionism, right? I really needed to know what I was working towards. I needed the map. I needed, I needed it to be a soundproof argument. Whatever that was. And so the being able to release what it means to anyone else and it be very personal, intimate. We've talked about the word intimate,
Mm-hmm.
right? For it to be completely okay with, well, this is what it is for me, right? And this is how I'm experiencing this incredible flow through me, call and response. And I think it might look different for you. And so not it's releasing that desire to have our notes always match up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just be in my relationship. Yeah.
So one of the things that the audience here is keenly aware of is what we call the divine. What you've referred to as the divine, based on my understanding of how you use the word, and what we call Elohim. But you had an interesting comment yesterday when we were talking in preparation for today. When you envision this consciousness, this being, this awareness, you don't see a face. You don't see so kind of for the next, again, few minutes, kind of paint a picture for the audience. What you embrace, what do you accept, what do you allow to be that guiding force in your life,
No,
a guiding
that's a great
presence in your
question.
life?
Sure. And that became more clear whenever I had what I called the fear wobbles, right? Whenever I would wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and just
Yes.
kind of that anxious, very,
So you did have you did have those moments. This wasn't
oh,
going through
oh
this
yes.
with.
Oh yes. No, there are certain themes, and then if we got down to the hour, no, yeah, absolutely, I had fear wobbles. But I learned to turn and look at them, right? Even as much
Absolutely.
as when it's dark outside, I would invite myself to go out and walk at 2 in the morning in my backyard, because I never did that. When it's dark, you might step on a snake. Like, you don't go that. And I say, no, if darkness is where fear bubbles, turn and look at it and say, hello, dark, what's going on, and sit and know you're okay. Right. And it was in one of those 3 a.m. can't sleep. Why is the fear bubbling up now? It's death. It's around death. And here comes this incredible, beautiful interview of a Navy diver, or Navy SEAL diver, I can't remember, but a very analytical guy who had a near-death experience. And the interview was really beautiful. It was really nicely done, and in a way that I could sort of receive his language. And he described this light, right? And this love and this expansion. So I started watching more of these near-death experience interviews where people had these experiences and held on to them for decades. And now they're slowly getting the story out. And I just had the most fun figuring out, like, they're all saying really similar things. And it feels like I'm peeking behind the curtain, right? It feels like maybe this is a good use of social media, but I get to peek behind the curtain and hear what others have experienced, regardless of their life walk and their journey. And what I learned from that, one was relationship is why we're here. That was a reoccurring thing. It's not accomplishment, it's relationship. And then the other part was this expansive light. And that language also matched up with this other language that I sort of had compartmentalized over here, that maybe you hear more around yoga type stuff, the light, more of these Eastern phrases. But that sort of this light and feeling of connectedness and feeling and knowing of a strong presence and love it resonated with me. And so that was what, as I have practiced there's certain, meditations to help tune your body into, pineal gland activation, for example. Like, there are things you can do to tune into that's always there. Right. And then, and it really hit home also when I read Autobiography of a Yogi, talking about Yoganandra. He came over here in the 1900s, and it was beautiful because it was one of my first hearings one of a miracle happening, not in Christianity, and something besides Christianity. And so I was like, oh, miracles happen for other people? Why do we not hear about this? This is pretty interesting. And then his language for describing Jesus is basically saying, no, Jesus is a great example of being able to have this amazing conduit, right? To source,
Mhm.
right? To God and whatnot, not any more, any less. And it does show the human potential if and here are practices that we have that we believe in to help tune in to be able to be connected to source. So it was one of the first sort of reframing of taking all these spaces and images like you were talking about. And in Christianity, there's a lot of imagery and having
Yes.
a place to say, cool, that works over here. And that's a reminder that it's possible, but what it actually is and what people have peeked behind the curtain and described doesn't necessarily have a face, right?
You know, it's interesting. One of the things, probably one of the greatest spiritual epiphanies that I've had in my journey was when I heard Elohim speak to me, the Creator speak to me, and said, you know, they said to me, they said to me, yeah, you know, we're not Christians or Buddhists or Hindu or Muslim, and for the first time, and it was a real epiphany for me because up to that point, my entire visualization, my entire conceptualization of the Creator was this Christian ideology, which is where I came from.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm sure others come out Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, and all of the other major and sub-major religions of the world. We envision the Creator, this divine being, as that thing. And
Mm-hmm.
when they said that to me, it was, I mean, doors opened for me. And now I can see the Creator in all different kinds of ways and from all different kinds of perspectives without labeling them with
Sure.
some religious constraint. And
Sure.
because I don't believe the Creator is religious, I believe the Creator is life. Okay. I
Well, and
believe, go ahead.
I would like to share a metaphor that is coming up for me as you're saying that, and it's one that was shared with me, and it's all of these lenses in which different societies or religions see. So imagine you're in a beautiful building with all these stained glass mirrors, and you might stand in front of one and the beautiful colors come through, and that's how you see the world, is through those colors, that lens. There's light on the other side that's shining it through, and you can go over and stand in front of this window, and the beautiful colors come through, and all those windows sort of represent those different belief systems, but it's ultimately the light
Yes.
outside that's the truth. And so I guess kind of to
Yes.
round out, one thing that as holding that image, I said a lot during my journey. I said, this light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. I said, I think that's what it's all about, right? And but it's that relationship and connection between the light of this divine and your own and our own, right, fragments of
Absolutely.
that light. And how do you let your light shine? How do you help others' light shine? And so I love that imagery and metaphor. Maybe the 5-year-old in me says, oh, that one's easy enough. I
That works.
can play with that one every day, right? Maybe I'm gonna
That
stop
works.
there and just say, this light of mine, how do we let it shine, right?
You know, it's interesting, and so first of all, two things. One, thank you for joining me today and agreeing to continuing this conversation. And I want to preface next week's conversation. I think the audience will be pleasantly surprised at the angle. I'm going to tease it. I know I am at the format of next week's discussion. So join us, those of you that are watching. Join us again next week. I think you're going to be extremely surprised and pleasantly surprised, as well as engaged at next week's presentation. But thank you so very much for spending the last hour or so with me to share your story. And it's one that I was looking forward to just having this conversation with you in a more formal setting, as we've had these informal conversations for the last several months. So thank you so very much. And for those of you that are watching, thank you for joining us and being part of the broadcast and being part of today's program. I want to encourage you again as we continue next week. Your questions, your thoughts, your inquiries around this fantastic story of our experience. I mean, I call it a story as in fictional, but this fantastic experience of Miss Taylor Silva, as she's sharing her life experience with us here on the set of Kingdom Voice. And so with that being said, thank you for joining us, everyone. Thank you for being a part of it. And join us again next week, right here, 10:30 a.m. Central Standard Time, as we continue to share with you truths of the kingdom from an apostolic perspective. Until then, be well, be blessed, and we'll see you again next Sunday morning. Thank you, everyone.